The next presenter is me. Spotted wing Drosophila, just a little bit about our company. Most of you folks are familiar with it. This is who we are right now. Top 3 people are in the office, my wife and I, and we hire seasonal scouts. Just to give you an idea, we've been working with spotted wing Drosophila right from the beginning when it first showed up in 2009. We're now into a basically, late 2009, we're now basically into our 4th season with it. We also cover a lot of fields for private life, but just to give you an idea of the number of fields we've been monitoring for SWD over the last few years that are grant funded. So for public information. And I'm going to go briefly through some of the research that's taking place before I go into kind of what's been going on with it over the last 4 years. Section 18, there is a label being pursued, and I just heard yesterday that the EPA has approved the tolerance for XRL. It should have a label for blueberries probably this coming season, and this should be a main one that we can get into our rotations with our other chemicals. Caneberries are probably a couple of years away from actually having a label for it, but it's on its way. It's really being fast-tracked by EPA, and it's our best option for actually another chemistry. There's ongoing work with Dow to reduce the PHI on the spinosins, so they're coming along. It's a complicated thing because as soon as you change the PHI, you're going to be worrying about MRL issues, residue issues more too, so it's not a simple thing, but that's the best option for our organic growers who are really in tough shape with this, is to at least get some flexibility on using spinosyn. You know, one of the things, and I think it's one of our main things we got to develop, is more attract and kill. It's baits that you can put on the side of the field or base of the plant that's going to attract this guy and kill him. I wish there's more work on that. We've got GF120, but it doesn't work very well. We need better attractants, and they're coming. There's a lot of work going on right now with better attractants for SWD. And once we've got that, we've got the chemistries that work with it, and I think we'll get better bait and kill products coming down the line that can really provide us with some options. And this is just to pass it on, and this is mainly from the East Coast, listening on their stuff. There's some efficacy work that's been done that looks like mixing some sugar with it works. Just passing these things on makes some sense. Not a big deal, but just to let you guys know some of the directions people are looking. And also, their research is showing that there's better efficacy for actually killing some of the larvae in the fruit from the sprays that we're going over the top, which would be really good news because we'd be able to clean up things a little bit better. Work needs to be continue on this. And something that I know has been going on in the industry, and I think we got to start talking about it openly and responsibly, is treating the outside borders of fields for control. There's labels for this where the products will work in certain situations, but really don't go off label. Don't just go out there and spray the edges of the fields. There's plenty of room for abuse and damage going on with that, so handle that up front with your supplier. If you want to do that, work out what your options are. And I use it as a last resort, not a first resort. Monitoring and trapping. The basic line for this season right now is there's no monitoring system that's good enough to tell you when you're going to be able to treat. We've had high trap counts with no larvae in the fruit, and we've had fruit infestations before we ever caught a fly. So there's population dynamics, poor attractants, and other factors that go into this. It's being improved, but don't use them right now for determining when to spray. On-farm use is problematic with these traps. It's not easy to identify these things. So if you're doing it yourself, there's a lot of false positives. People end up spraying when they don't need to. So ID is a problem. Regular maintenance is a real big issue. Folks on farm usually don't have time to do that. And placement makes a huge difference. If you place that trap in the sun, you'll get completely different results than if you move it 6 inches over in the shade. There's lots of variables that make it hard for growers to use on farm. However, it is very useful. But I think it's more useful in the sense of regional population, forecasting, using in border areas. If you get used to it on farm, use it, but be really aware of what you're looking for and how to use it. And useful in determining application effectiveness. But this is the warning, is you're starting to get commercial traps on the market, and you're going to start hearing lots of claims about these things for baits and detractants. It's getting there, but certainly for this season, don't depend on a trapping system to determine when to spray or when to treat. Try it out if you want. If there's nothing else from this you remember this curve. Because this is the thing that drives this insect. You start out, this is from Dr. Von Walton at OSU. And it's the basic dynamic that drives it throughout the season. You start out, this one is 3 females over here. 90 days later, at a constant 72 degrees, you've got over 700,000. So, you got very few at the beginning. They build up very quickly, but you know, we get down here like 60 days, you're going to have a big problem, but for that first 60 days, you might not even notice it. It's late season stuff to watch, generally. So, going through, okay. So fruit follower, you cannot kill this thing or go in there and treat it before the fruit starts ripening. You're wasting your time spraying the field before that. Or assuming, I would assume so. We'll see how this all works out. They really prefer raspberries and cherries and blackberries. They're going to build up faster. They're going to be a huge problem in those. You can get them in blueberries. We've had real bad problems, but they're a lot easier to clean up, and they won't get as bad as quickly. Older, softer fruit is much more susceptible. The winter severity, hopefully with these really hard cold spells we've had, is going to knock it down for this year, but we'll see. And the warmth of the sprinkler is going to determine basically, you know, if you've got a mild winter, this line's going to start up higher. If you've got a warm spring, summer, it's going to curve up quicker. It's basically what happens. So we got 4 years experience with this. We started out in 2010 and 2011. Both those years were cool, crops were late. 2010, we were worried. We had all these traps up there in strawberries early. We didn't know what was going to happen. And nothing showed up until late May. And, however, we didn't see much trouble. People were trying to question whether we knew what the heck we were talking about. We did see damage late season. This is kind of idealized graph to show you kind of what happened in 2010 to 2011. It was late. Mid-July is kind of my break point for this, just as a general thing. Before mid-July, there aren't many problems. After mid-July is when the threat really builds up. In general, there's going to be differences. 2010, 2011, development was really late. By mid-July, populations hadn't built very much yet. And most growers got through no damage except for that late crop. 2011, we had a very hard freeze in late February that killed them off, really knocked them down. And the same thing, we didn't see any real major problems until the last picks of mid-season caneberries. We had a lot of soft fruit out there. Guys hadn't seen any problems before. They were saying, why should I be out there spraying? Which makes a lot of sense. But we started seeing that it could be a problem in those late season late mid-season. Again, late season, this thing is almost always going to be an issue. And anyone growing evergreens right now, or chesters, or those guys know this. The late blueberries too. It's going to be a chronic problem in the late ones. – 2012 gave us some variations. It started out, I think I got some. We were really worried because development was 7 to 10 days ahead of where it was the previous 2 years. This season, we really saw this buildup starting to come earlier than the previous couple of years. And this was the first season we really saw mid-season blueberries kind of impacted. Shoots, blue crop, mostly machine picked stuff, soft fruit, hanging longer, bigger bushes. They started seeing some problems there, as well as mid-season blacks. And we were really concerned what happened. Well, it was 2012, we had about 4 days of mid-90s, early August. And it surprised the heck out of us, but it basically really suppressed it. And this problem that was starting to go became much less of a problem. One of the things on this that we're learning very quickly is that high temperatures affect it, as well as the low temperatures. And this is kind of where we get into how it's going to be regulated, how we're going to be able to predict it. And this last year was very interesting. We had all kinds of twists and turns here. We had our mildest winter ever, so we were seeing pretty heavy populations coming out of winter. Lots of alarm. And this really kind of freaked us out when we first saw it, but we had guys going into raspberry fields that they did normally. They treated them pre-harvest, went in for their first picks, and we were finding alarm. And it was kind of panic. But, so there were enough in some of these sites that there was SWD showing up right at the beginning. And if we ever got a perfect storm, if we got a mild spring, this curve could go right up like this. It's got potential to be a lot worse than anything we've seen yet. Then what happened? So we were seeing that. Then we had a really warm, you remember this season was very warm, dry. Both of those things, humidity and higher temperatures, suppressed the population. And it really pushed it down. But we still had a high enough population that we were seeing problems in mid-season blacks, last picks of dukes. I'd say most, all that I know of, I can never say everything, but all of the problems that I knew were associated basically with an inadequate spray program. If they would have stayed on a good 7 to 10 day spray schedule, I think, I can't say for sure, but everyone that I saw would have been okay. And then we saw, then, you know, it was warm. We didn't have a huge issue late season until very late when our temperatures fell into the 70s. We started getting rain, and suddenly that last picks of the late season blueberries got hit really hard. It just seemed to come out of the blue, and it was definitely associated, again, with lower temperatures, higher humidity. So 2013, we learned a lot. Mild winter, started out, first time we ever saw anything in the first picks. Summer was warmer and drier. Up in Mount Vernon, in some of those regions north, they've got a lot bigger issue with this in some ways because they stay in that sweet zone that it likes in the 70s, basically. Warmer, dry, so it's suppressed. We saw problems in the late dukes. Almost all, as I said, appeared correlated with fields that were not on a regular spray schedule. And then, as soon as we saw late summer was going pretty well, as soon as we saw that drop in temperatures and higher humidity, it came back with a vengeance. But there was only 1–2% of the crop left out there at that point. Unless, of course, we're out talking about all these fresh market guys who are out there trying to get late season crops. A lot of these, I mean, I know there are folks going out of business, especially trying to grow late season local fresh market. It is a huge issue, even more than the conventional. Weather factors. After a winter with hard freezes, we got a lower risk. Mild, higher. Before mid-July, lower risk. After, it's when we really have to start watching. Vaughn, and Jimmy, I'm sure you've heard all this too, but I think, you know, they will, that 72-degree level is where they want to be. If you go up to about 82, they'll be laying 1/3 as many eggs as at 72. So once you get out of their optimal range, it changes the dynamics a lot. Dry, low humidity, wet, high humidity. And that's microclimates or overall. Crop factors, we see very, very little problem with strawberries. It's not that they won't be or they couldn't be. It's just they come on early usually. They don't like the fruit nearly as much, or they don't infest the fruit as much as the caneberries, for sure. Higher risk, caneberries, any caneberry, later the harvest, the more the risk. Early season blueberries, lower, late season, much higher. Young firm berries versus older and softer. If you got hand harvested, obviously, if you've got an open canopy like this, hand harvested, you've got a lot less risk than if you're machine picking in a large field that's got large bushes that are shading and overall making it a much nicer environment and harder to treat. Other factors, drip irrigated, lower risk. If you're overhead irrigating, you're creating an environment that's got higher humidity. You're probably also washing off some of the chemical. Open canopy, lower risk. Heavy closed canopy, you've got higher humidity and lower temperatures in there. That's where they love to hang out, and it's harder to get to them. Ground applied versus aerial. I'm not saying this isn't good, but you want to use it judiciously, either early when the pressure is low or in a low pressure year. We're going to have variations from year to year. You don't want to depend on aerial application under a high pressure situation. You know, we've been working a lot with habitat. If your field is bordered by evergreen blackberries, wild cherries, stuff like that, you've got good habitat for them. You're raising your risk. And I think one of the first things I recommend to growers is start planning, managing the borders as well as the field. Be aware of what's around the field and start getting rid of stuff. And, you know, large conventionally managed fields are a lot easier to be sprayed on a schedule regularly than if you've got these smaller fields, mixed plantings, you pick, organic managed. They're all at much greater risk. Partly because they've got more border close to the plant, but also the SWD will go from the early crop to the later crop to the later crop. And it's just tough to treat on a regular basis. So this is basically the bottom line for what I'm telling folks for this year is we are developing, we're still in crisis management. This is not long-term sustainable way to manage this pest. But at the moment, if you're going to get a crop off, after mid-July, stay on a 7-day insecticide schedule. That might vary if we come up with this year. The forecasts say we've got really low populations, and if you want to stay on top of it. But if you don't want to take chances, that's what I recommend. But the other thing is to really establish an on-farm fruit sampling program. It's easy to do, and it gives you guys a much better control of your own farm. And lets you know when an infestation is happening or starting so that you can get on it quicker. And also, you'll start learning where they're coming into the field versus suddenly they're everywhere. And start modifying that area. It's cheap, easy to do, it's just getting into a routine. And this is what we do. This is what our scouts do on most of these fields. At this point, once you've got ripe fruit in the field, do not depend on traps, depend on this. You've got it on a machine, a couple times a day, whatever. Have somebody assigned to pull a sample, 50, 100 fruit, put them in a gallon-sized bucket, bag, pour in it salt solution, 1 cup per gallon of water. You can just, a lot of times, if you've got fruit that you suspect is infested, you can look at this bag 15 minutes later and you'll know whether it is or not. And just take it in on a regular basis. Do it as a routine. How am I doing in time? And just some feedback on other research developments that's been going on. I mean, the genome's been completed. This is good news for all of us. It will accelerate a lot of possibilities down the road. I don't think we have to talk about too much detail there. Biocontrol agents have been identified, have been collected, are being reared. But for our practical purposes, I really think that's in the 5-10 year range down the road, if that. We can't depend on it at this point. But it is being worked on, and I think it's going to be a significant part of our program down the road. Sanitation and prevention practices. It's worked really well for Driscoll's down south, but they're in tunnels, they use a lot more labor, they've got to take all that old food out of the field, and what we've seen is it isn't economic in our fields, and the fruit that's left on the ground has not been a major point of recontamination. Degree day, these are coming along. Vaughn Walton at Oregon State, Lenku. We're going to have good prediction models. We aren't there yet, but I think within 4 or 5 years, maybe sooner, we'll have much better prediction models. And if the grower's good enough, I think we'll be able to go down to field level with monitoring temperature, surrounding vegetation, humidity. We'll be able to do a lot better and be able to cut back on the pesticides. And I mentioned that. There's work going on, obviously, on the processor end of this, developing kill steps. And I don't, one of the others in the field might remember, a lot of, well, I know Driscoll's, the way they manage this in some ways is they pick it and cool it down to, I believe it's 34 degrees just about immediately, which stops the development of the larvae in the fruit. And they're picking every other day. So that basically a fair amount of that fruit might have some eggs or small larvae in it, but it's been stopped at an early enough stage that the fruit's still marketable. So chilling the fruit afterwards is a good step, but there's a lot of work going on that end too. And not my area. Cannon sprayers, Don from Jacked Up. I think he just stepped out. And I was just going to give him a good compliment because he says he donated a Jacked sprayer or the company used to North Atlantic, a research station, which is great. This is a little like aerial applications. I think they can be very effective. Early application, Jimmy Click is here from OSU, and he'll be talking about this right after the break also. Low pressure fields, low pressure years. Potential drawbacks that we're finding with cannon sprayers, they can fail in a high pressure situation. Basically, you're setting up a barrier on the edges of the field sometimes. Other guys go right down the middle of the field with them. Drift issues, obviously, when you're throwing it out 50 feet, 80, 100 feet, you can have drift issues. And one of our processors or growers this year did a lot of testing in different parts of the bush. And there's uneven residue issues. It could be as much as 30, 35 times difference between one part of the field and the other. And I should give you time to answer. You stepped out of the room down, but that is one of the drawbacks. It's like any tool. You got to know when it's useful and when it's not. Some of our guys, and certainly the tunnel production in California has gone very heavily into electrostatic sprayers. It's a different technology, different type of maintenance. You really got to stay on top of it. It's more expensive, but it does have great potential for this particular pest in particular. And I think that's the end. The idea is you got a lot of tools out there. There's more being developed. We have another chemistry coming online. We are in the midst of developing much better monitoring and sampling methods. And we're getting more sophisticated on this, especially for our commercial growers out here. I really feel like we're almost past the crisis and into figuring out our management of it. And we're improving. And I went through that. That's just got the older slide for questions.
many are you looking for before you say I've got to do something?
One.
Okay.
It depends, obviously. For IQF fruit, you're looking for one. If you're looking in raspberries, you're even more definite because they can spread like just so fast. If you find one in a caneberry field, you should get on it right away. If you find one or two in a blueberry sample that's going to processing, it's something to certainly be aware of. But the whole thing on thresholds and how actually, you know it well, the devil's in the details, how you sample and how many you find. It's going to differ because you've got to have a really good eye to see the little tiny ones when you can see the big ones. So, yeah, and processor expectations. But this is what they're doing on the docks. I think the other dynamic that's kicked in over the last 4 years is those first couple of years, the processors didn't know what they were dealing with either. And I think a lot slipped through from the dock into the final product before anybody really caught on. And they're kicking their losses back to try to stop any contaminated fruit from coming into the dock, which makes good sense. But it does throw the responsibility more back to the grower. Jim?
There's a lot of us that have been using this as a matter of course, where we're spraying in the field, whether it's caneberries or blueberries. If we've got wildlands around our field, it's got Himalayas and timber and stuff, we've been going around with one pass, going and shooting out. Now, I picked up on something the other day that's off label. Have you heard anything more about that? I mean, it's off label to spray into the wildlands around the field.
Talk to your supplier. There's a whole list. Joe DeFrancisco, when we were talking about this last year or early last year, sent out a list to me of a lot of products that are labeled for non-crop areas. If you just use what's in your spray tank that you've been spraying on the field, you're probably off label. But there are products that are labeled, and even ODA is kind of sorting this out. We had asked them what that language in the label meant. But it's an off-crop label that you need. Well, Jimmy, you've been doing some of this too, haven't you? You haven't been spraying reporters.
We haven't used borders sometimes.
So check, it's all on that label in your supplier. There are things you can use. Of course, it depends on what you got, riparian around you or something else too.
If it's just a brush or timber or something, can you use something even stronger?
Check with your supplier. The whole thing is, we gotta stay on label or we're really risking some bad things down the road. Not only, you don't know what the effects are, you guys know as well. All you need is one story that comes out. And it does a whole lot more damage than that one spray.
So, just going, switching up to strawberries, you put that one slide up about strawberries kind of flown under the SWB radar, and I assume that you're just referring to Juneberry and strawberries. So, I don't know how much data has been collected, and is there a preference or a non-preference of SWB to go after strawberries per se? The reason I'm asking the question is that there was over recent speech where somebody put up some numbers for sales of strawberry varieties, and what we stuck out was that Albion, full-bearing strawberry has really become the big #1 selling strawberry. So the guys that are producing later season strawberries, are they at risk or?
They are certainly at risk. And we've monitored not nearly as many day-neutral strawberries and Albions as we have with Juneberries. Juneberries are at little risk, although we have found minor populations. I'll tell you what happens with strawberries is they actually get more of our regular fruit fly, the melanogaster larvae in them when they start getting soft. And now with SWB, the processors and everyone else are looking at this a lot closer than they ever did before. But I was talking with Amy Dreves a few days ago, and she was saying that they had infestations that were reported and they tested them, And like 90% of them were melanic acid, regular fruit
This
fly
is
that would have been there
June
anyway.
berries.
But it's, what was that?
That was June berries.
June berries?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so strawberries are a little bit of a different thing. I don't want to say they're not at risk. But they definitely, we've seen infestations in both June bearers and bay neutrals. But not nearly as economic as our other crops. So it's really not much.
I think the other thing too with the strawberry is that because it's such a, it's more, it's
Media
environment
flesh.
has the direct sunlight on it and, heat associated just down on the plant. There's not a lot of canopy with, that humid, dry climate that it tends to keep the pressure lower than, say, something like a overhanging blueberry bush or beanberries, which are just attracted to more so naturally.
Yeah.
So, is there any off-season controls? That's one of my, you know my farm, Tom, I'm surrounded by the forest there, and I've got chokecherry in it, and I've got Himalayan blackberry wild nearby, and it's my understanding that they overwinter in the yeasts of the bark, or that's how they survive through the winter. There's no off-season controls that are available to us to help bring the pressure down before season happens. It's all just weather dependent?
Well, a couple of things. We're not completely sure how they're overwintering or what they're feeding on. So that's a possibility, likely one, but it's not. There's a lot of work going on. They seem to get in just about any crevice or crack to kind of overwinter, but they do like to overwinter in evergreens and high up. That's what they tend to do. So yeah, you got a perfect environment. And no, the simple answer is no.
Yeah.
There's not an overwintering thing. Try to manage your factors. If you understand what increases them, what decreases them, try to minimize alternate hosts.
Okay,
Look
so-
at border applications.
Yes, there's another thing, border application, when you have a tall evergreen surrounding you, right? Even with one of those, what do you call it, the cannon sprayer, it's gonna be really hard to really get into the canopies enough to be effective, during your spray season.
And the other point is, how many times do you want to be out there spraying your evergreens?
Yeah, exactly.
What it might come down to in a situation like yours, which is all blueberries,
Yeah.
is cultivar selection. Because your early cultivars will escape the test pressure.
Okay.
If you're trying to grow those late cultivars, the thing is, get them off before they get too soft.
Yeah.
Sanitation might be a thing, but really,
Okay, so
late
now there's-
cultivars might not be economic.
There's something interesting there, and I don't mean to monopolize time, but we're working really hard to convert to complete just machine picking. And because of that, we have that fruit present on the ground, underneath the tree, underneath the bush line. And I feel like, I was glad to see that you don't think that that's a preferred place for breeding, right? But I think that that's an issue, and I don't know exactly how to do sanitation properly, because nobody's gonna go around and vacuum up all the berries.
No, we were really worried about that when we started this thing, and I'll tell you, the stuff on the ground, Vaughn Walton just presented some stuff too a couple of days ago, where if you have weed net and you have an open canopy, the stuff falling to the ground heats up. And you'd be amazed, some of those fruits on the ground would heat up to like over 130 degrees internally. But they'll even heat up to like 100 degrees pretty quick. And it kills anything that's in them. And we've done some good studies on the whole sanitation. And as long as you're staying on, Amy's stuff says 16% of the fruit dropping on the ground in some situations could have been infested. But the thing is, if you've got a lot, they aren't going to lay, they prefer the fruit on the bush, the fruit on the ground to lay eggs. So if you're controlling them in the bush, the fruit crawling on the ground, if you've got 16% infestation, you've got a bigger problem with stuff. If you control the other factors, that shouldn't be the driver.
So they're not gonna choose to breed in the stuff on the ground?
No.
they're gonna choose to. So if you're controlling what's on the bush, you're controlling what's on the ground. That's what you're telling me. I got it, okay.
Yep. What's that? Think we are. Any other questions? It's a tricky one. And you know, one last comment I'd say is, you know, everybody's been saying, oh, this is kind of the death of IPM. And I'd say where we're gonna get into a situation where you almost have year by year. There's gonna be certain years, like last year, when it's heavy pressure, you've gotta treat or you're gonna be in trouble. We're almost at the point now where we can say it's gonna be a heavy year all along. And in lighter years, like 2010 or 2011, you're gonna be able to back off. Pressure is not gonna be as heavy. But at this point, to manage the risk, it's hard to tell a grower to do that.
So I just have one other question. Because I'm having to spray during the growing season now, which I didn't used to, I am finding that I'm having, is there any, I'm looking for appropriate shrouds to surround the tractor so that I don't end up dragging the heavy branches under the tires as I'm passing through. Do you know who's developing something along those lines?
You better talking to these guys.
I know, but I didn't get there.
Because I don't.
Okay.
I don't.
You seen any
You
good
guys,
ones?
Jim, you know any shrouds for the tractor to kind of pull things up or?
Only, you talking to me?
Yeah.
Only the ones that we've made ourselves, and some kind of belting or some kind of plastic or something like that.
You could do that, Jeff.
Yeah.
Talk to these guys, or you were nodding your head, or whatever.
Yeah, the homemade approach seems to be the way to go.
It is, isn't it?
So, all right, thank you.